On May 1st, 2007, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund presented the findings of its voter survey conducted among South Asian American voters. Joining AALDEF in discussing the findings were Deepa Iyer of the South Asian American Leaders of Tomorrow and Amardeep Singh of the Sikh Coalition. The findings were compiled from surveys conducted on Election Day, November 7, 2006, of 4,700 Asian American voters in 23 cities across 9 states. AALDEF surveyed a total of 1,266 South Asian American voters. Highlights of the findings include 76% of South Asian American respondents said they favored creating a way for undocumented immigrants to legalize their status. Additionally, 90% of respondents said they favored reducing the amount of time the government takes to process paperwork for immigrants waiting to enter the country. 66% of respondents also said they opposed making being undocumented a crime. Another finding was that language assistance and translated ballots are needed to preserve access to the vote. More than 1/5 of South Asian American voters were limited English proficient, and only 12% listed English as their native language. Currently, there is no language assistance provided for South Asian voters, although over 1/3 of South Asian American voters needed the help of an interpreter to vote. Lastly, South Asian American voters encountered unlawful ID requirements. The Help America Vote Act of 2002 requires that only certain first-time voters provide identification to vote. Yet 79% of South Asian American voters asked to show identification in order to vote were not required to do so under this federal law. Deepa Iyer of SALT and Amardeep Singh of the Sikh Coalition offered their responses to these findings.
We found it very interesting that over 76% of South Asians who were polled favor the creation of vehicles to allow undocumented immigrants to legalize their status, and 90% of South Asians favor the reduction of the backlog. To us, that's not all that surprising, because from our vantage point in the work that we're doing with communities around the country, immigration reform, immigrant rights really continue to be the topic of greatest concern for many organizations and groups. In fact, on the topic of undocumented immigrants, India is actually the 4th largest country that undocumented immigrants come from. So on the list of undocumented immigrants and where they come from, India is number 4, which surprises a lot of people.
But I think that those were really the two things that stuck out to me, was the need for voter assistance, and the fact that 1/3 of our community needed that assistance but did not have it under federal guidelines, and these are the most important people who need the more help than anyone else, and that 79% of our folks were asked for ID when they were not required to present it in order to exercise the most basic democratic right, which is to vote. So to have those numbers, that 79% number is critical. You know, it makes our case to policymakers that there's an issue, there's a problem. 79% of the folks who are being asked for their ID are not supposed to be asking for ID. We're concerned there might be profiling. Maybe we need education for poll workers.
A lot of first-generation immigrants in any community feel, don't rock the boat, right? So let's not talk about these issues. Let's just kind of pretend they don't exist and ignore them. So I think there's a little bit of that, and then I think there's a little bit of people just not knowing what their rights are. So I think it's a confluence of those two things. And hopefully with you know, the type of work AALDEF and the Sikh Coalition and other groups are doing, we can all start to educate our own community members to be a little bit more informed and not to condition ourselves to excuse or accept any